Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to this splendid location. I hope you've been enjoying the breakfast and some of the views this morning. And welcome to our presentation on Top Risks 2020. This is our 8th annual survey, and we're going to take a slightly different perspective on the way we illuminate those top risks during the course of our presentations this morning, and I hope you'll enjoy that. So, welcome. My name, for those who don't know me already, is Peter Richardson. Incidentally, for those who still do know me already, my name's still Peter Richardson. It doesn't change. My name's Peter Richardson, and I have the pleasure of being the UK country market lead for Protivti. Protivti is a change management consultancy, but we have risk management as part of our DNA, and that mixture I think is particularly interesting in the context of the presentations we're going to make this morning, and looking at the impact of risk management and the opportunity that delivers for change. And that's probably why our mission as Protivti is defined as delivering or bringing confidence, I should say, in a dynamic world for our clients. And our tagline is face the future with confidence. And I think, again, a lot of what we'll be talking about today is the dynamic world and the opportunity that brings for a different perspective on confidence in that world. So that's me. Just a quick show of hands, maybe. How many members of boards, executive management do we have here today? A good handful. Thank you very much. How about those who are risk management professionals? Many more handfuls. Maybe internal audit? Equal numbers again. Thank you. Line of business leaders? A small handful. Compliance, maybe? Yes. All compliance people are at the front, incidentally. I don't quite get what that might be, but interesting observation. Others? Oh, okay. I'll talk to you the others later and work out what you might be. Thank you. We live in an amazing time. We talk quite a lot about what I call what I refer to as a perfect storm. A perfect storm of change which is characterised by globalisation or deglobalisation, digitalisation, regulation, cybersecurity, and ever-evolving business models and the impacts that they have on the drive for talent and different needs for talent in different ways from our people. And I call it perfect storm because it's both a storm of risk and opportunity. All of those things are changing the way the environment in which we operate means our businesses might operate and thrive within that environment. And it's also a workplace in which there's phenomenal transformation in how we work, where we work, and the tools we use to support our work. Increasingly in our business, particularly, there's a great drive for agility, for flexibility, for different use of applications and tools, in particular technology, to allow our people to work more effectively in different environments. And I think that's going to be particularly significant, again, as we discuss things today. And we're going to be hearing more today, of course, I'm sure, about increasing regulatory scrutiny, about focus on technology and the extent to which that is potentially increasing risk at the same time as creating opportunities for growth and speeding up the art of the possible. And I'm looking forward to hearing our two speakers in particular and their perspectives on that. Just quickly, as far as the overview of the session today is concerned, how we're going to run this, we're at point 1 at the moment, that's good. I'm going to introduce shortly one of our two speakers, our keynote speaker, Hamish McRae, who's going to be talking about world economy in the 2020s and the risks and opportunities that that might present. Paul Middleton, one of my managing directors here in Protivti, is going to be introducing our study and talking to the detail within that study and our conclusions from that. We're going to do a question and answer session after the speakers have spoken rather than interrupting the presentations themselves. Those presentations are probably going to last about 50 minutes to an hour between them, which will leave us with a good half hour at the end for questions, intending to wrap up round about 10 o'clock with refreshments afterwards. I know you've already had a big breakfast, but there's more to follow apparently. There's some buns and coffee and stuff afterwards as well, and that'll be, of course, an opportunity to meet people and do some more networking if you have time to do so. The format's a little bit different to what we normally do. Normally we present the report itself and look at that pretty much exclusively really through what I would call the risk lens. And we've challenged ourselves today to look out a little bit further, to look broader than the direct report itself, and look more into the impact of those risks and the opportunities that they might create, and challenge ourselves to look out broader still and think maybe beyond where we are today. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. We are actually recording today, but it's only us at the front that are being recorded. We're not recording you directly behind us and or in front of us and watching that. So I hope that's okay with you all. Please sign up and look at our LinkedIn channel. There'll be reports from this on that too. We obviously want to hear from you, and we're looking forward to the question and answer session as well, and we look forward to answering your questions and encourage you to ask as many questions as you wish during that session. There are no fire alarm tests due, so the bad news is that we're on the 34th floor, and if there is a fire alarm, we will be walking down a lot of stairs to get out of the building. The exits are clearly marked in here, 2 at the side and 1 at the back. So if there is a fire bell ringing, it is a real fire alarm, I'm afraid. Just a final comment, really. This is a quotation from John Augustus Shard. A ship in the harbour is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. Again, I think we'll be hearing quite a lot about the intent and the purpose and the direction of business during the course of today. One other quotation from John Augustus Shedd. He said, "He who thanks but with lips thanks but in part. The true thanksgiving comes from the heart." And I truly thank you all for attending today. I hope you thoroughly enjoy it. I'm looking forward to it immensely, and let's get on with the proceedings. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Hamish McRae. Hamish is, well, he calls himself a hack. I think he's probably a little bit more than a hack. He's a futurist. He wrote a book actually back 25 years ago called The World in 2020. So it's fascinating to hear now in 2020 from what Hamish might be looking forward to beyond that point. The New York Times actually described Hamish as, or alluded to him as, a writer actually with 2020 vision. Such was their impression of his work back in 1994, I think, when they reviewed his book. He has a letter from Bill Clinton, who describes him as a man who knows all the good and bad about America. He's a renowned economic journalist. He was the associate editor-in-chief economic commentator on The Independent. He writes now for The Indie, for The Mail on Sunday. He was financial editor of The Guardian. He writes also for The Evening Standard. And he's got a fascinating perspective on the world looking forward, of risk and opportunity in the economy in which we operate. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce Hamish McRae.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you also for taking the risk. I mean, you know, these people are good at risk, but I always feel it's a bit of a risk asking a stranger to come in and be let loose on your clients. So thank you. I'm going to talk about the way the world economy might develop over the next 10 years or so, and try and pick out both the risks and the opportunities as they unroll. I mean, if we were having this conversation, we'll have a conversation afterwards, 10 years ago, we would have been pretty glum. I mean, we would have seen the worst recession since the Second World War, or since the 1930s, actually. And we'd have seen the worst banking crash since, gosh, I don't know, Bearings, maybe 1930s, whatever. And we would have been on the cusp of the longest bull market that's ever occurred. So risk is an opportunity. Biggest risk, biggest single risk, I think for us all, is that globalization goes wrong over the next 10 years. Kofi Annan said this about 5-6 years ago. He died, as you know, 2 or 3 years ago, that it was actually unstoppable. Well, it doesn't look so unstoppable now, and actually I'm going to show you some numbers that suggest that it's certainly in terms of, it's peaked in terms of goods in trade. And then if it starts to, we retreat from that, well, this is the view of Jack Ma. Globalization is good when trade stops, war comes. Well, I'm not quite sure we're quite as radical as that, but managing that transition is going to be tricky for the world, and we will all be affected by it. Give you the structure of what I'm going to be saying over the next 20, 25 minutes. Remember, risk is always an opportunity. 3 big points. Point 1, there is an economic cycle. Where are the risks there? Point 2, there are long-term structural shifts taking place in the world economy, away from the present developed world and to the emerging world, particularly to Asia. And where are the risks and opportunities there? And then thirdly, with technology, we'll come and see a little bit later some people who got one instance of people getting technology rather wrong. Story 1, the cycle. We know there is a cycle whenever a politician says there is no such thing as we have eliminated boom and bust. You know that's the time to run for the hills. We know there's a cycle. It would be lovely if we did, but we don't get the timing right, and we don't get the amplitude right. And we can't do that. So what we have to try and do is create systems which are robust as to the cycle. This cycle has been artificially supported by 0 interest rates. This must be nuts. It must be wrong. When I hear someone on the Bank of England's monetary committee saying, well, you know, the economy has got rather weaker and, you know, that means that we ought to cut interest rates by 1/4%. I just find, I just think this is madness. You know, this is what these clever, highly paid central bankers say, but you know, do you really think 1/4% off is going to make people say, oh gosh, you know, we really now go and buy our house? I mean, what actually generates these things is confidence. I would have thought having the Bank of England say you're going to take 1/4% off interest rates might actually damage confidence more than increasing it. Certainly doesn't help the pension plan. So anyway, so it must turn down soon. And we have to make then, I think, an intuitive judgment about the likely way in which it might turn down, being aware that our intuitive judgment is probably going to be wrong. And my bet, just to, I think there will be a mild dip probably next year, conceivably back end this year, probably next year, but a mild one. And I think the problem is not the amplitude of the dip. I think the problem will be the struggle pulling out. Now, in a year's time, we may, well, be completely wrong. But I think at least the useful thing, if you're worried about risk, is to think about the structure of the cycle and what it might be, and then do the what-ifs if interest rates shoot up. Some graphs. I'm an economist, so some graphs. This is a very simple one. It shows short-term interest rates. Oh, and by the way, if any of you want this presentation afterwards, you can, I'm sure it's going to be available. We're going to send it to you. The only thing I would ask, by the way, is by all means share it, but don't sort of post it. And within our lifetimes, we've had the US Federal Reserve target rate at 19%, and we've had European rates at -0.5%. It's kind of pretty big amplitude of swings. What I would say is short-term interest rates in human history have never until now been negative. Hasn't happened. It's the first time. So that says to me this is not perhaps too good an idea, and it's not going to perhaps last too long. If you look at long rates, we have a run in Britain going back to the 1700. And interest rates, nominal interest rates, between now and 1700 have never been as low as they are now. It's the consols and the 10-year gilt. When something is never as low as it has been now, you then say, well, wait a minute, this isn't right. This won't last. And that, I think, does then create a risk. Are we prepared for interest rate normality? They will go up. Will they go up fast? Will they go up early? None of that we can know. But I think that we need to ask the question, what if rates go back to normal faster than we expect? Who's bust? Have we got balance sheets that are robust enough to cope with that? What does that do to equity prices? Well, actually, probably not too much. But what does it do to bank balance sheets across Europe if yields on German debt go up to 10-year yield goes up to 2.5%, which would be completely normal? The social costs of ultra-easy money, in a way, almost worry me more. Why? Ultra-easy money boosts asset prices. So you get a lot of assets, you do very well. And the more assets you have, the better you have. And that rides social pressure. Wealth inequality has tended to come down in Britain. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Income inequality has tended to come down. Wealth inequality has gone up. And I think that's a lot of our social pressures are a result of the increase in wealth inequality. Bank of mum and dad. Great if Bank of mum and dad can get the children into their first homes. That's what we've had to do. Not so good if Bank of mum and dad can't do it. And I am profoundly worried about the social costs of that. And that shows up in all sorts of things, such as the gap between the young and the old politically at the moment, which is wider than, I think, probably ever. I mean, when I was young, this was the 60s, I think the young were pretty crap, actually. I don't think we were a very good generation. The young now are having to work jolly hard, and they may have nutty ideas about politics. I hope I'm not offending people here. I probably am, but you know what I mean. But in a sense, you can understand it if you look at interest rates and asset prices. Supposing my view of the cycle's wrong, could be wrong. I think robust for that. And then I think also, what are the opportunities? There are opportunities created if you get the cycle right. Be robust now, have resources that other people don't have when things turn down. And you will all, in your bits of world and perfect lives, and you will see things that I can't see there. Story 2. I'm going to show you just a couple of, 2 or 3, I think 3 graphs on that. Because it is happening slowly, we tend not to notice each year any change. But we're living through the most extraordinary transformation of the world since the Industrial Revolution, because we're seeing a rebalancing of the world towards what we call the emerging markets, away from the old developed world. In 1820, the world's largest economy was China, and the world's second largest was India. It's why I'm afraid Britons wanted to sell dope to the Chinese and take over India. All the other economies in Europe were tiny by comparison. That is now, I'll show you in a minute, going back to a world pre-1820s in terms of world wealth, world power. However, that is happening because of globalization, and there is this pushback against globalization from the right, who Trump wants to try and impose trade controls, push back against China, and from the left, who see globalization as a massive evil because it's run by the large companies. And those of us in the middle, I think, need to defend globalization, as best we can, but to acknowledge that it will be under pressure, and it'll be under pressure for the rest of our days. I'm actually okay with it. I think it'll change its nature, but we'll come to that in a moment. Has globalization peaked? Well, this is the changing nature. If you look at the top line, that's global exports as a percentage of global GDP, left-hand scale. It's peaked. It peaked before Trump. He's an example and a function of it, not actually the cause of it. If you look, however, then at trade in absolute terms, middle line, also stalled. But look at the bottom. Trade in services, much smaller, but still rising. And what I think we're going to happen to globalization is a shift from moving goods around. You just make wherever you can make things, reasonably effective, but you probably won't need to make things. That isn't where you make the money. You make the money on the design, the marketing, and you make the money on the services associated with the goods. And I think that if globalization moves from moving goods around to moving money and ideas around, as is happening, that is also a great opportunity. So I think the changing nature of globalization stalling is a risk. The changing nature of globalization is an opportunity. Second graph in this little section comes from HSBC. HSBC have done a really good piece of work, and you can Google it and it comes up, and I've just drawn this graph from that work, of a computer model of the world economy in 2030. This is a sort of improved version of the Goldman Sachs BRICS model. It's really, really good. I love it. And this shows the world in 2030. What is the largest economy? Probably China. And if China doesn't pass the US in 2028, as I think on their model, it'll pass it in 2032. It won't be right as to detail, but this is right as to thrust. So the pecking order of the world economy in 2030 is China, US, India, Japan, Germany, UK. UK starting to edge away from France. It's quite bullish about the UK, not because of Brexit or any of that stuff, because of our age profile of our population. I'm actually quite bullish about the UK over the next 10 years once we've got this present disruption past. And then you look down, well, Brazil doing pretty well. Russia, right down at number 13. Huh. Have a look at this later if you're interested, or go onto their site. I won't labour it, but it's a really good piece of work. It's the best piece of work that I've found. Some big questions. Well, for us, how do we remain outward looking in a world where power is shifting? It's kind of obvious, but it's also a risk that we don't. What can developed economies do which emerging economies can't do as well? I looked at the number of unicorns being created in the world. US and China are number 1 and 2. Depends a bit on how you do the data. China sometimes in some measures number 1. India number 3. We're number 4, but we're a very poor 4th. We're best in Europe, but that's not good enough. We've got to be better than that. We've got to think globally. What can we do that India can? Well, it's difficult. We can do education very well in this country. I like to think we're innovative. We can do finance very well. We can do entertainment very well. You know, fintech to Fleabag. You know, we do those sort of things. But I think we have to be pretty cool at asking ourselves, what can we really do? Because we're not going to pay for all this lovely city and spread it a bit more through the country if we're not just better at doing things. What happens if globalization stalls? I've talked about. What opportunities are we missing? You may probably have seen things in something I've said where there are opportunities that I can't see. It seems to me that in the education innovation space there are most of the opportunities. Story 3, technology. Huge impact of communications. Everything from, we all have this in our daily lives. I mean, I have it absolutely in my daily life because if I'm writing now for the Indie website, I have to write in a quite different way from the way I write in the Mail on Sunday. I have to write shorter. I have to be aware that my readers are not mostly, well, actually, come to think of Mail's website is the largest newspaper website in the world. So, you know, but you have to think globally. If I'm on the Indie, I am writing for a 27-year-old in San Francisco. Because we have more of our readers in America than we do in the UK. I have to try and not offend the woke 22-year-olds in Britain. But if you're writing Mail on Sunday, you're writing for the home counties, successful, prosperous, you know, people, doubtless, well, a few in this room maybe even. We are aging. How do we turn an aging society into a positive rather than regarding this as a drag on the economy? I get furious when I see those ads, you know, for product. How will you manage $1 million in retirement? And you see a chap, you know, sailing a yacht or something. Well, you know, someone who's able to, you know, be fit and active and sail a yacht, why don't you actually do something, you know, like do some work? You know, I don't think it's, unless you're building yachts. You see what I mean? I think we have to think of a changing workforce. Different employment market, and of the environmental and societal stress created by new technologies. I'm going to show 3 graphs on this. I showed 2 on the previous ones, but before we do anything, I want us to go to Rome. This was the inauguration of Benedict the 16th, 2005. And this was the inauguration of his successor. Have you seen this? You've seen this one before, have you, some of you? In 23rd Pope Francis. And it's the same view. He's somewhere in the distance. The iPhone, of course, was the invention in 2007 that, as Steve Jobs said, something comes along that changes everything. Steve Ballmer at Microsoft didn't spot it. Well, Microsoft did all right out of that. They are now the same size company as Apple. They're fine. They scrambled through. Nokia, well, still exists, but didn't see that risk coming. And so technology it was the largest manufacturer of phones in the world, 2007. Now it doesn't make them at all. It's a software business, an interesting one, but So, big risk. Let's look at some data on social networks, and you'll see some risks here. The grey lines, these are the top social networks worldwide in October last year. Top 4, grey ones are all the US. Orange ones are all Chinese. So where are the Europeans? Nothing there. This is a world dominated by the US, and with the US systems being stolen, shall we say, by the Chinese. We're not there. We're just not there. And that seems to me to be a whole set of risks associated with that. AI, strings of risk associated with that. And this is just a list of the jobs that are at risk, done by some consultants. Admin and secretarial and retail sales right up at the top, we know that. And then the whole high street risk. And then all the mortgages secured on high streets, all that. And down at the bottom, healthcare, education, construction. You build something like this, you still need people. There's a crane just out the back. You still need, a friend of mine who works for a big developer, he said, standing there, we've got to have a Lithuanian with a shovel. You know what I mean? You've got to have people to do it. So that is less at risk. But the whole middle area, they ought to put journalism at the top somewhere there. We're very much at risk. And there are the environmental risks. And I've just put on here a string of those which the UN and Nature have put at their top. And there's habitat destruction, there's disturbance, there's overexploitation, and there's global warming and pollution. I won't go through them in detail. It's something you might want to look at later if you're doing that. But I mean, the key point is we've got to have a thoughtful and measured appreciation of the various multifaceted risks that we know are there. In terms of the species affected, the biggest single one is habitat destruction due to agriculture. Some big questions. How does society manage social media? And within that, there are a whole string of compliance issues. What happens to news? My wife had to do a review for the government last year of what happened to news. And how do we protect news in the Cairn Cross review? How do we protect news in a social media environment? Unfortunately, they've had about 4 secretaries of state since then, and I'm not sure she's quite at the top of Nicky Morgan's priorities at the moment, but we will see. How do you manage AI positively? How do we use it? I'm a great bull that I think it'll take away drudgery work. And there was actually a very good speech by a chap from Nokia in Davos 2 days ago saying he thought this would enormously increase productivity. And I absolutely buy that. I think that AI and big data come together and enable us to increase productivity in the service industries. And I think that's really, really important. And I think technology will create better lives for us all. But we will be missing things, and that's something perhaps to talk about. My top risk, and this is how we're here, I think the cyclical risk, my top risk is that the cure has been worse than the disease. We've created too much inequality with our cure, and that's worse than the slow pullout. Global risk, we just mismanage the rebalanced world. America and China and India mismanaged that relationship. Got to get that right. I know we can't do anything about it in this room, but we have to be aware if they do mismanage it, that will affect us all. Technology, and this will be implicit, we lose faith in the benefits. I passionately believe there are huge benefits. I was distraught when the Indies stopped printing, and I was completely wrong. We've doubled our readership. A lot of journalists lost their jobs, and that isn't good, but we're now hiring again. And then finally, are we going to see within the next 15, 20 years the twilight of democracy? Will we be strong men, always men, around the world? Will we lose faith in democracy? And that does seem to me to be a most profound risk. But the prize for getting it right is huge. Human beings are the same. We have the prize of technology. We can recognize fears, and we've got the resources. We've got the resources available to fix things. We just need to have common sense. I want to finish with one slide, one quote. It comes from Barack Obama, and I'll paraphrase it because it's long. If you had to choose a moment to be born, knowing nothing about who you would be, rich or poor, your race, where you'd be born, knowing nothing, man or woman, knowing nothing, what would be the moment in history you would choose to be born? And the answer, of course, is now. And I think that still holds true despite all the fears we have. Thank you so much.
Hamish, thank you. Hamish, thank you so much for your fascinating analysis and insight and context for the next part of our presentation, which is now going to be presented to you by Paul Middleton. As I said at the outset, Paul Middleton is one of my managing directors in the UK, in the London office, and I'm delighted now to hand over to him to present to you. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here. And thank you for the introduction, Peter, and thank you, Hamish. As Peter said, I'm Managing Director within Protivti, and I look after some of our strategic client relationships in the UK. My background is in financial services, and so I apologise in advance for any bias I have towards that industry as I speak to you today. You can only imagine my horror when I was told that I was speaking today to have to follow Hamish. And as such a fantastic speaker, and then I was told, and actually you've got to speak after a triumphant video as well. So how do I follow that? My marketing department are very kind, they're very thoughtful. They said, look, don't worry, it's fine. You just need to bring a survey to life. No small ask. And there won't be many people there either, so thank you. The first thing I wanted to do is I thought, I'll try and beat Hamish on the quotes. So I saw his quotes, I saw the Obama reference, I thought, I've got to try and do better than that. Everything flows and nothing abides, everything gives way and nothing stays fixed. Who said that? Any classicists? So Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher 535 BC, said this. And what's he saying here? Well, this is about resistance to change. This is about how we resist change, how we resist new technology in today's world, how we might not look at new technology, how we might not look at the needs of our customer base. So be they old risks in Heraclitus' time or be they new risks to us today, this is about, and what he's saying here, this is about how we manage that change and really how we manage those risks. So the point here is that once you embrace that position, of wanting to understand your risks and wanting to be able to manage them, we think within Protivti, you're on the right path. You're in a much stronger position. And you all are. A number of you conducted and were part of our respondent group within that survey, and you're here today. So that, for us, is a fantastic, important step. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about the survey. The survey that you've responded to. In the survey, you have the results in front of you. And in particular, the top 10 risks, the top 10 global risks that you see. A lot of the themes I'll talk about will come back to themes that Hamish talked about and Peter talked about at the very start. But ultimately, for me, these are the three key themes that I'll come back to time and time again. You'll see that there are a number of internal risks, but also I'll be stressing the external risks. Hamish has stolen a lot of my thunder, but I've got to try. There are a number out there. I'm also going to be talking about how those risks are interconnected and that web of risks. And understanding that there is a web is an important step. And lastly, I'm going to be touching on how you go about it. And not just casually looking at them, but being bold, being proactive and doing something. They are themes that will come out. So it's important, first of all, to give you a little bit of context on our survey. This is the 8th year, as Peter said, that we've done this survey. We had over 1,000 respondents. Those respondents cut across financial services, consumer products, manufacturing, distribution, technology, media, communications, healthcare, energy, and utilities. Board members were the largest single respondent. That's an important fact to keep in mind for when you view some of the results and the lens that you look at that through. Board members tend to look at strategic risk. They tend to look at the macro. The second biggest set of respondents were CFOs and COOs, more inclined to look at operational risks. And we glean that knowledge from when we look at the commentary that comes with the respondents that came in. It's also a global survey. We are largely a UK audience today, but it's a global survey that you have. And so some things may be skewed from that perspective. I will show you a European perspective as well, which is not the one that you have on your cards, but it is a global survey. There is science behind this. We did this in conjunction with a university in North Carolina. As you respond to this, you scored risks. And that scoring goes into an engine that then generates the ranking of those risks there. So it isn't random, we don't make it up. There is science behind this. And that should give you confidence when you look at this and take some of these perspectives back. So let's get into the risks themselves. From a macro perspective, overall, you deemed that the risks in 2020, as you look out in 2020, we are less risky than 2019. That surprised some of us when we saw that. Actually, you placed us somewhere between 2018 and 2019. When we did this last year, 2019 was the riskiest year on record, according to the survey. But overall, we're under that. So why might that be? When we dug into it, a large part of that was due to optimism around the US market, in particular, and some of the bullishness in that US market and some of the outlet there was driving some of that sentiment. The number one risk up here is the impact of regulatory change and scrutiny on operational resilience products and services. That's a big category. That's a lot of words. And it's not a surprise to us that when you responded to that, you picked that as number one. That captures a lot of things. It was ranked third last year. Number one was the point around competing against born digital firms. That's now slipped to number 4. But regulatory change linked to operational resilience is up there at number 1. From my perspective, from my naive perspective, looking at the financial services world, that's not a surprise. We sat there in our office at the end of last year and saw a huge uptick in regulatory scrutiny of our clients. The regulator writing to our clients and saying, we're going to come and look at you. And what are we going to focus on? We're going to focus on how you manage IT change. How resilient are you? What are your cyber threats? They're all linked. They all come up there into that topic of resilience. And that's a large part of what we do, a large part of where we work with our clients. So we're not surprised by that. The number 2 risk is around economic conditions and how they impact growth. That wasn't in the survey last year, or rather, it wasn't in the top 10 risks last year. So that shot up there. Now, again, we found that surprising. For those of you who saw Trump's Davos speech the other day, he effectively was saying the old Macmillan quote of, "You've never had this so good." Is he right or wrong? Those markets are strong, but we believe within Protivti and looking at your respondents, that is driven by the impact of uncertainty, particularly around Brexit, but also the US-China trade war, geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, the European market weaknesses. They all give cause for concern and they all weighed heavily on your respondent details. So the commentaries that we saw there push that up to number 2. And then at number 3, succession challenges and the ability to attract and retain top talent. This for us is where it gets interesting. That was at number 2 last year, but the fact it's still up there is interesting for us because we see it echoed time and time again throughout those questions. If you look at point number 4, for example, you'll see that theme about talent stretches across into that risk as well. It is echoed in why you can't compete in a digital world. It's echoed in point 5, in risk 5, around why people are resistant to change. And it's echoed in point 8 around the culture to speak up around risk, and in point 10 around the adoption of digital technologies. The point about talent and people and having the right people in your organization is at number 3, but actually is in almost 50% of those risks. So people is a key risk for you. Risk number 4, the ability to compete in a born digital organization. This is another key theme. And again, it's not just there, but that concept of technology and innovation, you will then see echoes across a lot of those other points. Cyber, resilience, at the top one. Operational resilience is about a large part about technology resilience. It's there. It's in point 6 around cyber. It's in point 7 about privacy and identity and access management. And it's also around the adoption of digital technologies. So we see that you have these 2 interconnected themes. You have the themes of culture and people, and you have the theme of innovation and technology. When we look at Europe then, very similar, but in comes a different risk. At number 10, and you didn't see this before in the worldview, at number 10 in comes poorly prepared for reputation management. Why might that be there and not in the other one? Well, again, we dug into that. Particularly in the European market and particularly in the UK market, and the UK was the biggest respondent within Europe within that. This is on the backdrop of the context of some high-profile corporate failures in 2019. In Q3, corporate failures were up by 15%. But also GDPR drives a lot of that, and the reputational damage that comes from getting that wrong. You only need to look at the big fines for Airbus, Marriott, BA, Google, as well as Facebook data breaches to see how important GDPR failures can be to the reputation of a brand. But my two themes remain constant. I'm happy that these two themes capture the essence of what we have here: technology and innovation, and talent and culture. But when we looked at this as a team, we were surprised. Overall, something felt as though it was missing. What would anyone share a perspective? What do you think might be missing? Come on, it's interactive. Anyone? The environment. Thank you, Peter. So we looked at this and we said, well, given the backdrop of what's happening at the minute, why do we not see environmental factors so strongly in our own survey? Peter wasn't happy about this when I started this. I said, I'm going to pull apart our own survey a bit, so I have to stick to a certain line. But this we thought was worth talking about. So why is that not in there? I looked at the World Economic Forum's global risks for 2020. These are their top 5 risks: climate action failure, weapons of mass destruction, biodiversity loss, extreme weather, water crisis. They don't really jump out of our own survey, of the responses that you guys have given. And it is a different audience. The WEF, they're in their 15th year. They've got us on that. And they go to a different, they go to a different group. In particular, they have Global Shapers community, which are a bunch of entrepreneurs and social leaders. It's probably more diverse, but ultimately our survey goes to leaders, executives. So whether you're a Greta or a Donald, we think there are risks here that need managing. As Hamish said, the thoughtful appreciation of multifaceted risks is at the heart of this. But I'm still intrigued why. And that's where I would welcome perspectives as to, there was an opportunity on the report for people to say about environmental risk, but it wasn't on there. Would anyone like to share a perspective? Yep. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So the point there was about time horizon. So maybe we're looking at a shorter time horizon, whereas the World Economic Forum is maybe bolder, looking at that broader time horizon. Absolutely agree. I don't have the answers, by the way. I'm just interested in your perspectives. Any other thoughts?
About culture.
Yep.
Environment is obviously science behind it. It's an emotional topic. So how is that informing the leaders of our organisations?
Yep.
The culture of being able to talk about it when historically it's not been something we're used to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think culture's a large part to do with it. I read something the other day about Swedish airlines. In Sweden, there is a culture of flight shaming. So a Swedish airline, I can't remember which one, but its flights are 5% down on year. And part of the reason for that is flight shaming, about the environmental impact of taking flights. To Stuart's point, that is around culture. That is a cultural shift. So if we had in this room a CEO of an airline company, probably the environmental impact or the environmental risk would be up there on their agenda. So my conclusions around that, around the survey. People are becoming critical in a digital world. That's actually a wonderful oxymoron. It's something that we're all told isn't the case. Hamish showed a very good slide about showing the various jobs at risk from the digital, in the digital world. But actually, the responses you've given are saying people are absolutely critical. It's the right people that you need. But if you get that right, you're future ready. A 360-degree understanding of your risks is also important, because only by doing that can you understand how they're connected and how you have that interconnected web of risks. And the last point is about being bolder. Part of the reason, and I agree with the time horizon, I agree with the culture point, but part of this we think is about being bold and looking beyond your immediate horizon. If we put ourselves back in 2005 or the early 2000s, how many people would have thought, for example, digital would be a key risk for us now? How many people are going to put their head above the parapet and look at what the next risk might be in 2025? That's what I mean by that. So it's thinking broader, it's being bold, it's sticking your hand up. It comes down to the speak up culture. It comes down to just saying what really the risks are beyond your immediate front door, beyond your company, beyond your industry, and what's out there. So at the heart of this, we touched on the risks. It's really then moving on to the opportunity. As Peter said at the start, our strapline is about facing the future with confidence. And that not only encapsulates risks, but also getting confidence by how you harness the opportunities. So I'll take those themes one by one. Firstly, people are becoming critical in a digital world. I'll give you my perspective on that. We work with a lot of clients to help them understand where they are from a digital perspective. And what we find interesting is that digital footprint that our clients have isn't one that is well understood. Very often our clients initially might tell us, we're digitally advanced. We do a lot of things digitally. We're fantastic from a digital perspective. And certainly, a lot of our clients are. But sometimes we view that as a bit of a digital veneer, a bit of digital window dressing. I bank with a well-known high street bank. They give me an app. They say they're digital and they give me a great app. The app works all the time. It's pretty resilient. It works really well. I can do my banking. I can scan checks. I can do a lot of things. But the other day I rang them up to open a bank account. They've known me for 20 years. And they said, yeah, to open a savings account, you need to come to our branch. You need to scan your passport just to check who you are. You need to tell me your outgoings. I said, well, you see that? Yeah, but we need to go through them. We need to tell me your salary. I said, but again, you see that? Yeah, but this is the way it works. I could go, if I wish, to a challenger bank and open that in seconds. So why is there a difference there? We could argue that part of that difference is because that bank has embraced a digital footprint for some of what they do, but they are not truly digital. We believe that digital leaders to the far right of that scale are ones where digital is a mindset from the very start of what they do to the end. It's a culture, it's an attitude. It impacts and it shapes the way they look at problems, the way they interact with customers, the way they interact with their own employees. And that's the difference. That's what drives people from the left of that scale up to the right. And really, that comes down to having the right people. You will never achieve that unless you have people with that right mindset who will challenge that and will say it's not just good enough to have an app that does that. You actually need to embrace the full life cycle of that customer's journey through your bank. So how do we address that within Protivti? How do we work with our clients there? Well, actually, this is the result of a digital maturity assessment. So this is a free tool that we have. You click on our website, you find it. It is a quite easy assessment tool that looks at certain categories within your business and you answer questions around them. And that then gives you back your score from a digital perspective, but also, most importantly, it compares you against your peers. And so it begins that digital journey assessment for you. It shows you where you might have gaps, where you might have issues. Importantly, it isn't just about technology. It focuses on your vision, your culture, your organization, and your technology, but it's the whole of that. The second point then of my conclusion was around a 360-degree approach to risk management. I spoke with one of my clients the other day, and they kind of backed this up, and they gave me this idea. They said to me, and this person runs a large operational resilience function, and he said to me, the way I look at my risk is also almost like one of those, almost like a DNA ball of interconnected streams. And he said, so my challenge that I want to do is almost be able to pick that up and visualize it. And I want to understand that even though I may have mapped a process from there to there, and I can tick a box to the regulator and say, I've mapped a process, actually, what I can't map are all the interconnectivities. And I want to be able to visualize that. And I want to be able to turn that ball around. I want to look at it in different ways and look at it from different perspectives, almost like a Rubik's Cube of ways of looking at it. And I like that concept. I think that's at the heart of how risk needs to be looked at. And that talks to some of what Hamish says, it talks to some of those concepts before. It's about broadening those horizons, but understanding how they are all linked. So again, one of the ways that we do this is through working with our clients using a framework. Because our clients come to us and they say, what does good look like? Am I risky? What are my main risks? Am I riskier today than I was yesterday? Will I be riskier tomorrow? And to do that, you cannot look at one risk in isolation. But you need to look at all the risks, because they're all interconnected. So this assessment here gives 360-degree visibility. And why? What's the opportunity there? Well, it consolidates the disparate parts of your risk management. It should allow you a better understanding of your marketplace, a better understanding of your competitors, and it should show you where those opportunities are compared to them. Very often people value those peer comparisons, and we think that's great, because by not being an outlier, by understanding where you are, can have comfort with regulators, but also it helps you chart that path forward. But here's my final thought about risks not being able to be viewed in a silo. Hamish spoke a lot about the economic cycle, and that is absolutely part of this. But for me as well, I focused on horizon scanning. And actually, this is about you. So everything I've said here can be academic if ultimately you do nothing. A lot of you here, when you had a show of hands earlier, so many of you are risk stewards. This is in your gift to do this. If you are bold, and if you go back, and if you challenge the status quo, and if you put your hand up and say, these are our risks today, but what will our risks be in 2025? We believe that's going in the right direction. But ultimately, do something. Because with that lovely quote there, that's more useful than doing nothing. But actually, I'll go a step further than that. If there's one thing that the World Economic Forum Risk Survey says, and our risk survey says, is that the risk of doing nothing is the greatest risk. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both, Paul and Hamish, for your very interesting presentations, analysis, insight. I'm sure that that has raised lots of thoughts, challenges, questions in your minds. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to get these things going, but I'm going to try straight away and say, would you like to pose some questions to our presenters? Who's first in line? There's one right at the back there, please.
Craig Thornton. Okay, Craig Thornton, Asahi International. A question for Hamish, if I may. You talked about potential rollback on globalisation and on democracy, but not so much about our model of relatively unfettered free market capitalism. Don't you feel that the inequality that's been created either does or should sound the death knell for that model in a shorter timescale, perhaps, than either globalisation or democracy?
Very good thing and question, and thank you for asking me. I've thought quite a lot about that. It depends where you're looking from. If you're looking from here, from the Shard, you see the triumph of the market system. If you're looking from where I spend quite a lot of my time in Scotland, in a little place called Dalbeattie on the Solway, you're really seeing none of the benefits. I mean, it's tricky. It's tough. It's a town that's struggling. But we are looking from a mature, developed world, and we're seeing the benefits and the difficulties of the mixed market systems. It's a mixed market system. I don't think anyone, in the most extreme elements of the market, acknowledge there shouldn't be a role for governments. I mean, governments have to do something, and governments have to order, and they have to control, and they have to regulate. But that's only it's seeing everything through a prism of our world. If you're looking at China, they've taken, depends a bit on how you do the sums, 600 million people out of poverty and into a middle-class lifestyle through application of the market system. It's not capitalism, but it is the market system, and Jack Ma is what, number 6 in the world in terms of wealth. If you look at what's happening in Africa, fastest growing region of the world at the moment, albeit from a low base. Again, it's market systems, actually helped a lot by technology, which are lifting that. And of course the same in India. So I think that one final thing, there's a study by Brookings which looked at the proportion of the world that was middle class. And they came up with a rather cute and slightly spurious calculation, I think in September of 2018, that at that moment in time, half the world was either middle class or richer. And this has never happened before in human history. So I think that I'm reasonably confident that a mixed economy will have more support around the world, even if there is, in the Labour Party, much more concern about its bad functioning, and much more concern if you're working for some British charities about the fact that there are huge inequalities. So I sort of feel that globally, the market system has done pretty darn well if it's lifted half the world to middle class. And the projections are 2/3 of the world will be middle class by 2050. I sort of feel comforted by that. Not the perfect answer, but it's about the best I can manage.
Thank you. I'd like to debate it further, but I won't dominate the conversation here. Thanks.
Thank you. And another one towards the back there. I'll come to the front for the next one.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yep.
Probably, a question for Hamish and Paul. You touched upon social media, digital. My question is around the potential risk from Generation Z. So Generation Z, the age group up to 20, 21, they sort of live culturally in a completely different way. The way they interact, the way they socialize, the way they share ideas. And I mean, as well as an opportunity, but it's also a big risk because, I've got 2 teenage lads and I just see it. And I've heard about it at various presentations. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that because that could be a big risk to, industry and commerce and the way industry, companies will need to think going forward into the future as this Generation Z comes through.
Well, shall I give a quick response, and then Paul can, probably more of an expert than I am. I see this through the prism of writing, and the plus being I can reach people worldwide. The minus being you're terribly worried that they're only reading on a narrow spectrum of views. I think that this is an initial response to a whole set of new technologies, and I think it is very worrying that people only talk to themselves, so to speak, or to people who agree with them. And if you do that, you don't see things coming. And sitting in the Independent with a pretty lefty group of young people, when I go in there, they just had no perception of what's going to happen in the election. They couldn't understand it, and they're still finding it very difficult to process. And that's just my own narrow perspective on that. However, I think that the fact that talking to some of the people, they are aware this is a problem. And that's the first thing of fixing it. And that you do, of course, have access to the great world of opinion outside there. And I think what will happen is these are new technologies hitting a generation. As people get older, they will actually use those new technologies to broaden out. But if you say to me, what's the evidence that they're doing, it's pretty sketchy at the moment. Do you think?
No, thank you for that. I agree with that. I'll take a slightly different perspective on that. Before I do, is anyone here from a challenger bank? What they describe as a challenger bank, a new bank? Excellent. So I'm not going to offend anyone straight away. One of my clients is a challenger bank, and I was there the other day. And for those of you who have been or kind of worked with those institutions, they absolutely want and they attract that Generation X. And it's an amazing place to be. You go in there, there's people bring their dogs, they kind of, they walk around in their bare feet. It's all very different. And my conservative team of kind of auditors and risk managers are not comfortable there. We're not, we're trying to be cool, but it's just missing. But it's interesting talking to them. So I'm talking to the CEO, he's about half my age, and he's telling me about how they go to market and all their team behind them that are that Generation X. They built it up from the very start with that team, and it's so exciting. And they have simple architecture, everyone understands it, and they go forward. But because they are so Generation X, because they are so millennial, they speak to that as a customer base. When I say to my mum and dad, would you ever consider banking with them? My parents, well, no, I've never heard of them. Why would I go there? I go to a high street bank. And that's the challenge almost, that they're so defined by being that Generation X, by being so cool that actually they limit their customer base. So it's taking a slightly different perspective on that. I see how it plays out wonderfully in being able to harness the power and the passion and the insight and everything that's different about that generation. And going back to what I was saying there, I think to be to be a born digital firm or to become almost a born again digital firm, you need that Generation X. You need those crazy ideas in the room. But also then if you go that far, how do you then speak to your wider market base? Because you can begin to alienate them just by having that brand shift. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, I've worked in financial services and banking, and I have some experience. I won't name the firm, a building society, a very old building society, and they had an aging customer population, and working there, it was so behind. It had a long history, but it was so behind, out of touch with the new generations, X, Z.
Yeah.
And it's frightening, right? Because they can't get out of their history. Like your new challenger banks,
yeah.
your startups, they're attuned in the way you described. So yeah, I mean, I think that resonates. But you know, I've actually seen it for real, and it's quite you know. And if these organisations don't change, and in the way you described in your graph earlier, they could get left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Incidentally, from someone running a consulting company that is trying to be relevant to its clients in that space, we of course recruit now particularly our graduate intake from exactly that population, and we do it because yes, we need to play to those strengths. We need that degree of, I mean, we talk about diversity and inclusion a lot, don't we? We talk about it from a gender perspective and from an ethnicity perspective, etc. We need to think about it from a generational perspective as well. And we have to, and it's a bloody nightmare managing some of these people. And it's a bloody nightmare getting them and training them and finding space that they like to work in, even in the Shard. But we have to do it. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, playing to strengths and drawing upon the strengths of those people and what they bring to our organisation, it's a great bonus.
Just to build on that, I think when you look at our company as a whole and our attrition rates, I believe around that Generation Z, it is the highest. So for us, one of our challenges is how we reinvent ourselves, how we are the employer of choice to them. So what do we need to look like as a digital leader to attract those people, to retain those people, to get them excited about being the next generation of leadership? I think that's always on our agenda.
There was a question here towards the front, yeah.
Good morning, Ed Blakely, Barclays Bank. I was starting to wonder with some concern when the topic of climate action pressure would be raised. So Paul, thank you very much for including that. I'd be interested to hear from both of you what you think the opportunities in that regard are for the UK economy.
Shall I go first? Give you a moment to think. Yeah. We're not doing too badly in the UK. We are the largest offshore wind farm users in the world. And we will become even more when the Dogger Bank thing comes on stream. So in terms of the decarbonising our economy, we're actually doing very well. And that has been opportunities in all those technologies. We also have a power supply infrastructure which I think will create more opportunities just to become more efficient. I mean, if you're looking at how do you become more efficient, you can do an awful lot by applying good ordinary or good technology over the area. And the great thing about one of the troubles of our country is we're very uneven. You know, the best are wonderful, and the bad is that there's a long tail of mediocrity. And I think that our opportunity is to get the best in terms of practice. And it isn't just energy use, it's all sorts of things, more evenly through the land. So I think in that space, that's a very general answer, there are lots of opportunities. If you say to me, okay, McRae, give me an example of that, I would have to say, well, wait a minute, I need to talk to someone who is really good at improving energy use in the home. and asked to see what Centrica are doing on that. Well, they're probably not doing enough. But there will be opportunities in each individual segment to take the best and lift the average.
I agree with that. I may go a kind of a controversial step further here, but going back to how I described the digital world, though, I see the response to some of the environmental threats as being a little bit of window dressing, a little bit of token, you know, we do this, or we've cut the number of flights we do, whatever that is. And I think if I would almost take that digital segment and play it from an environmental perspective, I think there is an opportunity for companies to develop their brand to show how environmental they are. Because why will that be appealing? It will be appealing to the customer base, the Generation Zs that you're describing, but also everyone else. But what does that mean? That's not just publishing a green-coloured annual report or putting some statements out there in the market. It goes back to a mindset. It goes back to a culture. It goes back to a way of solving problems from that environmental perspective. Are we all going to get up and go to a conference in the US? Probably at the minute, when that's the way we work. We don't really think that much about it. But making statements about, well, actually, we do this differently. This is our environmental policy and actually it impacts our day-to-day. I think there's a brand opportunity there. I think in the next 10, 15 years, I think people will look at companies from a resilience perspective, and they will say, I want to go to this client because, or I want to use this because it's resilient. It's not going to fail. I like it. I have faith in it. But I think that environmental one is heavily second as well. We were shocked when we looked at that Davos report, and we looked in kind of some level of panic around how different those results were. I could have showed a number of other perspectives showing how if you went back to 2008, it was all economic. Those top risks in 2008 were all about the crash, were all economic. From about 2013 onwards, everything shifted to environmental. And those kind of global systemic issues, water crisis, things like that. So I think there's an opportunity to evolve brands to really encapsulate those themes, to be market leading, as I think that's where the best people and customer bases will drift towards.
Can I just add one word? The word is authentic. I think you've got to be authentic. It's worse to say we are wonderfully green and everything, and then actually screw up.
It's worse,
you're Boeing. It's awful. Got to be authentic.
Thank you very much.
Just an observation from a comment that one of our CTOs made to me at a dinner a couple of months ago. Out of interest, how many people have more than 6 television screens, computers, or laptops or other digital devices in their office, in their home at the moment? Pretty much everyone. More than 8? Yeah, more than 10. We used to have one television in our house 30, 40 years ago. There's a connection, is there not, between the amount of digital capacity and capability we're producing and the amount of power that requires to support it. I mean, clearly there's a lot more efficiency now. But it's incredible the plethora of electronic devices we have around our homes these days. Any more questions? Yes, there's a question further back there. I think we've probably got time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Probably a bit of the observation rather than the question. So you've showed 3 things around the key being the people and talent and technology and climate. And we've talked a lot in the questions about technology and the climate. On the people side, it was more about hiring millennials. The other thing that Hamish said was the UK, one of the exports or something that UK does best is education, and education innovation is an opportunity. I just wonder if UK has sort of missed that boat already, because and also if you do the same survey in the HR and other spaces, whether that will come up the same, because if you look at all the change you're showing in the last 20 years, it's dramatic. If you look at how people hiring and what people are doing, not in work environment, but actually hiring and building talent and education, it hasn't changed, certainly in the UK in the last 20 years. But if you look at what's happening in Asia, China, Singapore, all the innovation in education are actually miles ahead. And just an observation.
Yeah.
I wonder what you think about that.
Which I say it's a very important observation. Thank you for it. I mean, we're doing okay on the PISA report. I mean, we're sort of middle of the pack, a bit not losing ground, maybe gaining a bit of ground. In terms of universities, I really think we're still right up there. I mean, you can slice it any way you like, but I mean, we've got either 4 or 5 of the top 20 universities in the world, and 2 of the top 2 or 3 of the. I mean, you know, I think it's pretty good. I mean, I know a lot about Oxford. Never having, I went to Dublin, but know a lot about Oxford. My wife was head of an Oxford college, and so I was the trading spouse there. And my God, they were annoying, but they were so good. They were really, really good. You know, this is the 3rd best university in the world, or the 4th best, or whatever. You know, it's really, really good. So I think our problem goes back in this country in education to the unevenness. The best are wonderful, but the average is not good enough, and the worst are really not too good. But I mean, at least we are aware that this is important. And I think that's the first stage of that. But thank you for raising it. And I wish we were doing better on the PISA results. And you know, the PISA, it's in French. It works. It's 16-year-olds around the world, survey done by the OECD. It's really, again, it's really, really good stuff if you're interested in that.
I agree with it. I think it's, as you look at our education system, I have 2 daughters and I have a son. My daughters go through school and they're offered French and Spanish and German to learn, which is great. They love it. My son's offered Chinese, and I think, wow, how wonderful that is. Because actually, if you take your graph there, that is why are we not? And obviously, there's probably a deficit of Chinese teachers, but that is such an important skill set to have in the next however long. One observation that I would have on what you said, I don't think it's just about hiring millennials. I don't think we all need to pack up and go. I think it's about embracing some of that mindset and actually allowing them to speak. And because by doing that, I think we can learn a lot. So it's having that openness and that willingness to take a risk. Yes, they might be off the mark sometime, but that can drive it forward. But I think it's having that blend, because sometimes it is experience that's needed. Maybe there is no substitute for experience, but it is blended, I think, with that outset, and that's where I think there is a competitive advantage if we change our mindsets in that way.
Yeah, but I mean, they're very sweet to me on the Indie. My job is to supply diversity. You know, I'm the only white elderly male there.
Thank you. I think we've approached the witching hour. It's just turned 10 o'clock, and I promised you that we would aim to finish by 10. So I'm going to draw a close to the questions there, if I may. There will, of course, still be an opportunity to talk and network and mingle with our presenters outside here. So let's please do that as well after now. Thank you once again, both of you, for your very insightful presentations. From my point of view, this whole thing, I talked about the perfect storm, all these drivers of change, risk and opportunity at the outset. It's driving a lot of change in our business too. The things you're coming to us with now are fundamentally different from where they were even a couple of years ago. We happen to be a consulting firm that's owned by a staffing and recruitment firm. So we're a $1 billion consulting firm, part of a $7 billion global staffing and recruitment firm. And people used to come to us purely for consulting projects or people, bodies, staff, augmentation. And that's changed dramatically. What's happening now is a much more agile set of demands from you, based on, I think, a lot of what's happening. So sometimes you need people, sometimes you need projects, sometimes you need them short-term, sometimes you need them long-term. You want outcomes, you want deliverables, you want things changed. And increasingly, you're actually saying to us as well, can you just take the problem off my hands and sort it, please? Fix it, run it for a while, and then give it back to me fixed. And that's fundamentally different for us. And I do believe it's been driven by this dynamic world we operate in. And we believe we have a good opportunity to work together with you to help provide that confidence in this dynamic world. I know many of you are clients of ours already. Some of you may not be. I look forward to many more of you being our clients in the future. Thank you for your participation today. One last point. There is a feedback card on your chairs. It asks you, please, for some feedback on the content of today. We like to change these events, as I said, we've done today, and mix this up a bit to make them different and more exciting and interesting for you. So we welcome that feedback. We also ask you to say, well, there's anything particularly that's your burning issue that you'd like to talk to us about. If there is, please write it down and we will come back to you. So please fill in your feedback forms. After this, please enjoy the networking and the refreshments outside. I really appreciate your participation and thank you for everything. Thank you.